century, the world shifted on its axis as Christopher Columbus, an audacious navigator from Genoa, set sail under the auspices of the Spanish crown. His 1492 landing on the shores of the Bahamas was not merely a moment of geographical happenstance, but represented a turning point that heralded an era of fervent exploration and territorial acquisition famously known as the Age of Discovery. So this period was deeply interwoven with the political, religious, and economic ambitions of Spain, a burgeoning power on the European continent eager to expand its horizons and assert its dominance. Spain, at the close of the 15th century, was a nation freshly unified under the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Following the Reconquista, the protracted process of reclaiming Iberian territories from centuries of Moorish control, this reconquest concluded in 1492 with the fall of Granada, infusing the nation with a revitalized sense of nationalistic zeal and a fierce determination to spread Christianity. The discovery of new lands across the ocean presented Spain not only with unprecedented opportunities for wealth through colonization, but also a divine providence to propagate the Christian faith. Amidst this backdrop, the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 played a pivotal role, brokered by the Pope, who held substantial sway over European monarchies at the time. This treaty was designed to resolve conflicts between Spain and Portugal, another seafaring nation with colonial ambitions. The accord split the newly discovered lands outside of Europe into Spanish and Portuguese spheres of influence along an imaginary line 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. This division was intended to facilitate peaceful colonization efforts by both powers, but in reality it laid the groundwork for centuries of colonial rivalry. The motivations fueling Spanish colonization were famously summarized as the pursuit of gold, God, and glory. Conquistadors, driven by the prospect of immense riches and lands, embarked on their ventures intertwined with missionary zeal. Like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, whose names are indelibly etched in the annals of history for their conquests of the Aztec and Inca empires, exemplified this dual drive. Their expeditions were characterized by brutal conquests and the imposition of Spanish culture and religion upon indigenous populations. Indeed, the Spanish conquest was markedly bolstered by technological advancements in naval engineering and warfare, which allowed them to project their power across the oceans with newfound efficacy. The introduction of the caravel, a small, highly maneuverable sailing ship, was a cornerstone of their exploratory success. Additionally, the Spanish leveraged their superior military technology, such as steel armor and firearms, elements that the indigenous populations of the Americas had never encountered. The seismic encounter between the European explorers and the indigenous peoples of the Americas triggered what has come to be known as the Columbian Exchange. This vast two-way transfer of crops, livestock, ideas, technologies, and, tragically, diseases reshaped the entire globe. European diseases such as smallpox and measles swept through native populations with devastating effect owing to the absence of immunity among indigenous peoples. This initial contact sparked a dramatic and often violent recalibration of global populations, economies, and cultures. It led not only to the significant depletion of the indigenous populations of the Americas, but also transformed dietary habits and agricultural practices on both sides of the Atlantic. New World crops like potatoes, maize, and tomatoes were transported to Europe, significantly altering European cuisines and agricultural practices, while Old World livestock such as horses transformed the lifestyles and warfare practices of Native American tribes. Thus, Columbus's 1492 voyage, while a footnote in the broader narrative of global exploration, marked the beginning of an era of profound transformation. The expedition set forth under the Spanish flag wove a complex mixture of conquest and collaboration that forged the modern world in fire and faith, gold and glory. The relentless pursuit of gold functioned as the key driving force behind Spain's expeditions into the New World. This quest was not merely due to greed, but also a sophisticated economic strategy. Gold, synonymous with wealth and power in Europe, was rumored to be in plentiful supply in territories like Mexico and Peru. The Spanish crown, eager to fill its coffers, deployed conquerors who set out with dreams of vast riches gleaming in their eyes. The implementation of the encomienda system further illustrates this point, as it allowed Spanish settlers to essentially claim lordship over indigenous populations. Through this system, they coerced the native people into laborious mining and agricultural tasks, funneling unprecedented amounts of precious metals back to Spain. The allure of gold thus translated into a brutal extraction of resources, irrevocably altering the economic landscape of the conquered regions and financing Spain's position as a burgeoning empire on the European stage. Alongside the fiscal motivations, the Spanish crown was driven by a powerful religious imperative: the spread of Christianity. The fusion of the sword and the cross was an archetype of Spanish conquests. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, under the banner of religiosity, promoted missions as vehicles for cultural imperialism, mandating the conversion of the New World's indigenous peoples. The establishment of missions and churches was not merely a quest for spiritual conquest, but also served as outposts of colonial authority. These religious missions often resulted in the erasure and suppression of rich indigenous cultures and faith systems. The role of figures like Bartolomé de las Casas, who later defended the rights of indigenous peoples, underscores the deep moral and ethical conflicts embedded within these missionary expeditions. Thus, the mandate to spread Christianity, while draped in the guise of salvation, wrought profound cultural and social upheavals in the New World. The personal ambitions for glory and honor also played a pivotal role in the expansion of Spain's New World territories. Conquistadors such as Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro became almost legendary figures, emblematic of the era. Cortés, through a mix of diplomatic maneuvering and outright military force, orchestrated the fall of the mighty Aztec Empire. His tactics involved forming alliances with discontented tribes, exploiting internal divisions, and capitalizing on the technological superiority of Spanish arms. Francisco Pizarro followed a similar pattern in Peru, leading to the downfall of the Inca Empire. Their quests were marked not just by the pursuit of personal glory, but also by the ruthlessness and strategic cunning that would lay the foundations for new governance structures in these vast territories. Their stories, while often glamorized, highlight a grim tableau of ambition, betrayal, and transformation brought upon by the clash of civilizations. These three powerful motives, gold, God, and glory, intricately interwoven, propelled the Spanish conquests and shaped an era that would forever change the landscape of the New World. Each element, whether driven by economic, spiritual, or personal forces, contributed to the vast and irreversible impacts on both the indigenous populations and the global dynamics of power. The legacy of these conquests continues to echo through time, reminding us of the complex collage of human motives and the profound consequences they can unleash. Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer born in 1451 in the Republic of Genoa, today part of Italy, remains one of the most controversial figures in history. His life encapsulates the fervor of European maritime exploration that marked the late 15th century. Initially a simple mariner, Columbus's ambitious nature led him to seek patronage from various European monarchs for an audacious voyage across the Atlantic, ultimately securing support from the Spanish crown. Columbus postulated that sailing westward from Europe would be a direct route to the lucrative markets of Asia, a notion that proved transformative for global geopolitics despite its geographical inaccuracies. His famous 1492 voyage aboard the Santa Maria, accompanied by the Pinta and the Nina, culminated in the widely recognized discovery of the Americas, though it would be more apt to describe this as a beginning of documented interactions between Europe and the New World. Columbus's 4 voyages to the Caribbean and Central American coast symbolized the onset of vast cross-continental exchanges and the subsequent age of exploration. While definitively lauded for his seafaring achievements and navigational dexterity, Columbus's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, oppressive governance, and exploitation of indigenous populations places a shadow over his legacy. His actions set the precedent for centuries of exploration that would exploit new worlds while drastically affecting native peoples. In 1485, Hernán Cortés was born into a modest, noble family in Medellin, Spain. Driven by tales of Christopher Columbus's discoveries, Cortés embarked on his career as a conquistador with an insatiable ambition for wealth and glory. Arriving in the New World, At the turn of the 16th century, Cortés initially served as a notary in Hispaniola, but quickly hungered for greater exploits, leading him to participate in the conquest of Cuba. Cortés's most formidable venture was his 1519 expedition to Mexico, ignoring orders to return to Cuba. He forged ahead, ultimately orchestrating the downfall of the mighty Aztec Empire. His strategy involved cunning alliances with some indigenous tribes and unrestrained warfare against others, leveraging his technological and tactical advantages. His tenure as the governor of New Spain was marked by a brutal consolidation of Spanish authority and exploitation of the region's resources. The profound cultural and biological impacts of his conquests, from the spread of European diseases that decimated indigenous populations to the relentless extraction of wealth, are pivotal elements in the narrative of Spanish imperialism in the Americas. Born in 1484 in Seville, Spain, Bartolomé de las Casas initially ventured to the New World with prospects similar to many conquerors of his time. His participation in various colonial campaigns, including those in Cuba, exposed him to the inhumanities perpetrated against indigenous communities. His transformation from a conqueror and encomendero who received rights to tribute from native peoples to a Dominican priest and staunch advocate for indigenous rights marks a significant chapter in his life. Deeply moved by the plight of the indigenous populations and the brutal modalities of colonial exploitation, de las Casas dedicated the latter part of his life to their defense. Notable among his works is a short account of the destruction of the Indies, a searing critique of European barbarism against the native peoples. His advocacy extended into the highest echelons of Spanish governance, pushing for legislative reforms, including the laws of the Indies, aimed at ameliorating the conditions of indigenous peoples, although with limited success. De las Casas's vociferous campaigns made him a moral polarizer, revered as a protector of native rights, yet criticized for his proposals that inadvertently recommended African slavery as an alternative to native labor. His complex legacy provides an essential perspective on the ethics of colonial rule and the enduring impacts of these historical interactions. As we draw the curtains on our exploration of the Spanish colonization of the Americas, we venture into a realm marked by stark contrasts and deep paradoxes. Tonight's journey through history has unveiled a kaleidoscope rich with moments of grandeur, characterized by adventurous explorers setting sail towards the unknown, their hearts and ships laden with dreams of new worlds. Yet interwoven with these threads of discovery and conquest are the darker hues of exploitation and tragedy, a narrative punctuated by the profound suffering endured by the indigenous populations. The Spanish colonization was not merely an event in history, but a formative epoch that redrew the contours of the world. It catalyzed seismic shifts in geopolitics, economics, and cultures that have left indelible marks on the continents involved. This period introduced new commodities to the global market, silver from Potosi potatoes for Europe's tables, that forever changed the dietary and economic landscapes of the world. Moreover, it sparked a cultural synthesis, albeit often forced, that fused European, African, and native traditions, crafting a new cultural mosaic in the New World. As historians, we grapple with the complexity of colonization's legacy. The cultural exchanges that occurred were not just products of benign curiosity, but were also instruments of domination and control. The Spanish brought with them their language, religion, and customs, imprinting them upon the indigenous societies. This imposition led to a cultural metamorphosis, the effects of which reverberate in the linguistic and religious contours of the Americas today. Reflecting on this monumental chapter, it's crucial to acknowledge the resilience of the indigenous peoples who navigated the turbulence of colonization. Their enduring spirit and continual resistance against erasure and assimilation are testaments to human endurance and adaptability. This acknowledgement does not undo the past, but serves as a foundational step towards understanding the complexities of our intertwined histories. The narrative of Spanish colonization compels us to reflect on broader questions about the nature of history itself, the interplay of power, ethics, and the human consequence of empire. How do we, as modern observers, reconcile the awe of exploration with the ethical dimensions of subjugation and domination? What lessons can we carry forward into today's globalized world, where the dynamics of power and exploitation still echo those of the colonial past? In conclusion, as the echoes of the past still resound in modern corridors, the story of the Spanish colonization of the Americas remains particularly relevant. It serves not merely as a historical account, but as a lens through which we can examine the shaping of our current world. It calls us to question, reflect, and learn, urging us to navigate the delicate balance between celebrating achievements and acknowledging injustices. As we continue to explore and recount the multifaceted narratives of history, let us carry forward the humility to learn from the past with an eye towards a more thoughtful and inclusive future. As always, history is not just about understanding what we were. It's about envisioning what we can become. We've reached the end of another episode. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, goodbye for now. Please subscribe to the show and make sure you never miss an episode.
In tonight's episode, we journey through the misty corridors of late 18th century America, an era marked by the crackle of musket fire, the fervor of pamphlets, and the bold assertions of liberty. It was between 1775 and 1783 that the American colonies, spurred by a cocktail of Enlightenment ideals and escalating tensions, boldly stepped onto the stage of world history to challenge the might of British imperial rule. This period, vibrant with the energy of profound transformation, set the stage for the birth of a nation whose founding principles would reverberate through the corridors of power worldwide. As we delve into this significant epoch, our narrative will weave through the complex fusion of conflict and ideology that characterized the American Revolutionary War. From the green fields of Lexington to the harsh winters at Valley Forge, the colonies were not just fighting against external control, but were also internally debating what sort of nation they ought to become. This was a time rich in philosophy as much as in military engagements, a crucible of modern governance, where ideas borrowed from the likes of Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were hotly debated in assemblies and alehouses alike. However, the quest for independence was more than a mere colonial uprising. It was a profound transformation of political and personal identities. The revolution provided a platform for discussions on rights, representation, and the role of government, discussions that would lay the foundational stones of the new nation. This wasn't merely a change in political leadership, but a profound cultural shift that questioned the very fabric of societal norms and governance. Tonight, as we peel back the layers of history, we see that the American Revolution was driven by a daring vision of the future. It was propelled by human stories of immense courage, bitter loss, and hopeful ambition. Our focus extends beyond the battle strategies and treaties, reaching into the hearts and minds of those who lived through the upheavals, those who dared to envision a different society. This episode will not only recount these historic events, but also reflect on their meanings, capturing the spirit of a time that continues to influence the dream of democracy around the globe. The roots of the American Revolution stretch back into a complex confluence of economic pressures, social transformations, and intellectual awakenings that marked the 18th century. To fully grasp the upheavals that spurred the 13 colonies toward independence, one must consider several key elements: the economic policies of the British Empire, the philosophical ideals percolating through Europe and America, and the very fabric of colonial society. In the wake of the 7 Years' War, which spanned from 1756 to 1763, Britain emerged as the dominant global power, but found itself encumbered by massive war debts. The British government's solution was twofold: to reassert control over its colonies and to transform them into profitable assets. The colonies, long accustomed to a degree of autonomy and economic freedom, became the targets of a new wave of fiscal policies designed to fill Britain's depleted coffers. The first of these, the Sugar Act of 1764, aimed to enforce the collection of trade duties, which colonists often evaded. More than a fiscal measure, it signaled a shift in British colonial policy from salutary neglect to one of active, and often obstructive, intervention. The Treasury in London also tightened enforcement mechanisms, which added to the colonists' growing sense of alienation and mistreatment. However, it was the Stamp Act of 1765 that truly inflamed colonial resistance. This act mandated that printed materials in the colonies, from newspapers to legal documents, carry a tax stamp. This direct tax touched every colonist, igniting a firestorm of opposition and uniting disparate colonial interests in a shared struggle against what they saw as an infringement of their rights. The intellectual groundwork for this resistance drew heavily on Enlightenment ideals, which emphasized individual rights and questioned traditional autocracies. Figures like John Locke argued for the social contract, a theoretical framework suggesting that government powers are derived from the consent of the governed. In the coffee houses and salons of America, these ideas found a fertile ground amidst an increasingly literate and politicized population. As these Enlightenment ideas permeated colonial society, they mingled with existing beliefs and norms. Many colonists saw themselves as British citizens, entitled to the same rights as those residing in Britain, including representation in the decision-making processes that affected them. The rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," wasn't just a slogan. It was a demand for the rights they believed inherent and inalienable. Simultaneously, Britain's continued enforcement of mercantile policies, which limited who the colonists could trade with and what could be traded, acted as another stranglehold on the economic ambitions of the burgeoning colonial bourgeoisie. These policies, meant to ensure the colonies remained profitable and subordinate, instead fueled resentment and desires for economic self-determination. As the revolutionary spirit grew, so did the confrontations. Events such as the Boston Massacre in 1770, where British soldiers killed 5 colonial citizens in a chaotic skirmish, became emblematic of the simmering tensions. Each violent encounter and every disputed policy coalesced into a larger narrative of imperial oppression and colonial resistance. Local governance structures also played a pivotal role. While officially under British rule, the colonies had developed their own legislative bodies, such as the Virginia House of Burgesses, which began operating with an increasing degree of self-assurance and autonomy. These institutions not only provided a political framework for dissent, but also helped crystallize a uniquely American political identity. Governed by their own elected assemblies, many colonists felt their rights were being directly impinged upon by distant British decrees, adding a constitutional dimension to their grievances. In understanding the American Revolution, one must see it as not merely a war of independence, but as a revolution fermented by a confluence of economic exploitation, intellectual revolution, and political transformation. The colonists were not just rejecting British rule. They were asserting their vision of a society founded on principles that they believed were being denied to them. The transformative period leading up to the American Revolution was marked by a series of confrontational acts and intellectual awakenings that gradually, yet persistently, set the stage for a monumental shift in political ideology and power structures. At the heart of this dynamic was the Boston Tea Party of 1773, more than a mere act of defiant vandalism against British tea cargoes. This event was a calculated expression of resistance against the oppressive tax regime imposed by a distant government that lacked any form of colonial representation. The very act of throwing tea into Boston Harbor symbolized a rejection of the principle that Britain could govern without accountability, galvanizing the colonists' demand for greater autonomy. As we peel back the layers of this revolutionary period, it becomes evident that the seeds of discontent were sown much earlier. Enlightenment philosophy had begun to permeate the minds of key colonial figures, introducing them to radical concepts of governance. Philosophers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau challenged existing norms with their ideas about the social contract and the inherent rights of individuals. Locke's assertion that governmental power is justified only by the consent of the governed redefined the role of the state in the eyes of many American colonials. These Enlightenment ideas circulated through pamphlets, books, and spirited discussions in taverns and town squares, fostering a philosophical cohesion that united diverse colonial factions against a common imperial threat. By 1775, when British soldiers and colonial militias clashed at Lexington and Concord, the ideological framework structured around liberty and democracy was firmly in place. It was not merely the clash of arms, but the clash of ideas that defined these initial skirmishes. The battles were symbolic, representing the physical manifestation of a much deeper intellectual and emotional struggle for a new order based on Enlightenment principles. The bloody encounters on these battlefields were thus not the beginning, but the continuation of a conflict that had been intellectual and political from the start. Amidst this burgeoning revolt, Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense emerged in January 1776 as a powerful cannonade of rhetoric aimed directly at the heart of colonial ambivalence. Paine's prose was incendiary, calling for complete independence from Britain and the establishment of a democratic government that echoed the Enlightenment values, increasingly embraced by the colonists. Common Sense was phenomenally influential, selling thousands of copies and, more importantly, converting widespread colonial uncertainty into resolute determination. Paine's arguments made the case for independence seem not only logical, but an inevitable step toward the actualization of the philosophies that had been brewing among the populace. This intellectual ferment and the escalating conflict were not confined to isolated colonies or intellectual circles, but were part and parcel of continental congresses that deliberated the path forward. Congresses convened, encapsulating representatives from various colonies, each bringing their regional perspectives, yet often united by the shared injustice they all endured. Debates within these congresses could be fierce, as loyalist sentiments clashed with revolutionary fervor. But the prevailing desire for autonomy pushed the agenda towards decisive resolutions. Militias formed across the colonies, indicating a parallel preparation for the possibility that words would need to be defended by warfare. Thus, by mid-1776, the landscape of the American colonies had transformed dramatically. Intellectual debate had laid the groundwork for armed conflict, and acts of resistance, like the Boston Tea Party, had evolved from isolated incidents to symbols of a widespread revolutionary movement. The fusion of intellectual discourse with militant action underlined the uniqueness of the American Revolution. It was as much a battle of philosophies as it was a battle of armies. In the whirlwind of the American Revolution, a variety of key figures emerge, each playing critical roles that not only shaped the course of the war, but also the foundational structures of the United States. Among these, George Washington stands as a towering figure, not only in sheer stature, but in his monumental role as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. born in 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia. Washington's early military experience during the French and Indian War proved invaluable. His leadership style, marked by resilience and a keen ability to learn from earlier setbacks, galvanized a ragtag army in a fight against the world's most powerful empire. His strategic decision-making at crucial battles such as Trenton and Princeton reinstated the morale of American forces and sustained the revolutionary cause. Parallel to Washington's military exploits, his diplomatic acumen was evident in his handling of the Continental Army's diverse and often unruly elements. Washington's ability to maintain the loyalty of his officers and men under dire conditions, like the harsh winter at Valley Forge, spoke to his qualities not just as a military leader, but as a charismatic figure of unity. Another significant, but perhaps less heralded figure is Abigail Adams, who provided an intellectual and emotional bulwark to her husband, John Adams, one of the key architects of American governance. Abigail was born in 1744 in Weymouth, Massachusetts, and her correspondence with John during the periods of Continental Congresses offers a window into her profound influence over matters both domestic and political. Her letters plead with eloquence and urgency for the inclusion of women's rights in the new legal frameworks being forged. Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors, she wrote, pushing the nascent republic toward a more inclusive rhetoric. Though her immediate impact might have been limited, with the early republic maintaining most of its patriarchal structures, Abigail's advocacy foreshadowed the much later movements for women's suffrage and rights. Her intellectual partnership with John was not just personal, but inherently political, blending the private and public spheres in revolutionary America. On the other side of the revolutionary divide were the Loyalists, or Tories, whose narratives are often overshadowed by the victorious patriots, but whose experiences illuminate the complex socio-political fabric of the period. Individuals like Thomas Hutchinson, a former governor of Massachusetts, represent the Loyalist perspective, born into a prominent Boston family. Hutchinson's loyalty to the British Crown was unwavering, despite the growing unrest and violent clashes that marked the prelude to the Revolution. His correspondence and memoirs provide critical insights into the colonial administration and the challenges it faced during this turbulent time. Hutchinson's eventual exile to England reflects the personal cost and the divisive nature of the Revolution, a poignant reminder that the conflict was as much a civil war as it was a battle for independence from British rule. These profiles exemplify the nuanced array of human experience and influence during the American Revolution. Washington's military and leadership skills, Abigail Adams' progressive views on gender equality, and Hutchinson's staunch loyalty to the Crown demonstrate the breadth of personal convictions and the various roles individuals played. Their stories are essential in understanding the complexities of the era, not just in terms of political and military outcomes, but in the forging of a diverse American identity that would continue to evolve long after the last shots of the Revolution were fired. As we draw the curtains on today's historical journey, we've traversed the intellectual and political topography that shaped and was in turn shaped by one of America's founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. His exceptional blend of charm and wit not only adorned the halls of the French court, but also underscored a pivotal era where intellectual prowess was as crucial as diplomatic agility. Jefferson's tenure in France was no mere sojourn. It was a mission steeped in the Enlightenment ideals he so cherished. His eminent scientific reputation, cultivated through meticulous studies and vibrant exchanges with Europe's intellectual elite, preceded him and laid a foundation for the diplomatic feats he was to accomplish. Here, Jefferson was not just an emissary of a nascent country, but a herald of a new way of thinking and governance. Turning our gaze back to the American colonies, Jefferson's role in drafting the Declaration of Independence was monumental. In it, the eloquence of his prose and the clarity of his vision coalesced to articulate a set of revolutionary ideals that would resonate through the ages. These ideals, liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness, were not merely lofty aspirations, but were the cogent echoes of the Enlightenment, envisaging a society built on reason and mutual respect rather than monarchy and inherited privilege. Across the Atlantic, we saw oppositional figures, such as King George III and Lord North, embody the British resistance. Their policies, often perceived as draconian, did more than tax. They inflamed a desire for self-determination and catalyzed a colonial unity that would eventually lead to the upheaval of war. In their stance, we observe the clash of old and new worlds, the friction between an established empire and an emergent state yearning for autonomy. Reflecting on these titanic figures and monumental events, we are reminded of the cyclical nature of history, how demands for freedom and self-governance echo and re-echo in different epochs and locations. Thomas Jefferson, with his pen and his intellect, did not just help birth a nation. He helped articulate a global discourse on human rights and governance that challenges us to this day to understand. Jefferson is to understand a man of complexities, steeped in the pursuit of knowledge and the practicalities of political life, yet not immune to the contradictions of his time, such as those surrounding the issues of slavery. These paradoxes invite us not to judge with the haughtiness of hindsight, but to ponder the multifaceted nature of human endeavor and morality. As we conclude, one is left to wonder, how do the legacies of such figures and their philosophies manifest in today's global political landscape? How can we draw from their insights and oversights to better navigate the complexities of modern governance and communal existence? These questions, perennial as they may be, invite us to continually seek understanding beyond the surface, urging historians, scholars, and lay people alike to delve deeper into the kaleidoscope of the past, to glean lessons for the future. Thus, our historical exploration, while providing insights, also opens avenues for further scholarly research and public discourse. This interplay of past and present, of inquiry and reflection, remains essential in our collective endeavor to understand the broader dimensions of human history. We've reached the end of another episode. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, I wish you well. Please subscribe to our show to make sure you never miss an episode.